Well, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today's discussion will focus on the challenge of building, maintaining and upgrading the UK's vital mobile telecommunications network. It is a bizarre reality that we are now used to having high-speed internet connectivity beaming into all of our devices at all times, to the extent that any loss of connectivity ranges from being hugely annoying to business critical. But the good news is that having identified the need to provide universal coverage as a key priority in its 2018 needs assessment, the National Infrastructure Commission now describes this sector as one of its success stories in terms of positive investment activity over the last 5 years. And according to its latest progress update, the UK's 4G coverage now extends to around 92% of the landmass, and it adds further coverage improvements in the harder to reach areas are continuing until the start of 2027. Great progress indeed. Not least given that 5G networks are also being extended across the UK and coverage now stands at around 70%. As the government puts it in their recently published wireless infrastructure strategy, the ambition for the majority of the population to have access to 5G signal by 2027 has been achieved 5 years early. We're not out of the 5G connectivity dartwood quite yet though. I suppose in short, the commercial viability of full 5G coverage beyond cities and urban centres will be determined by whether it becomes more than just a faster version of 4G. So what's going on? Is 5G in a high-speed mobile future likely to be universal across the UK, or limited to those in cities who are able and willing to pay? Well, to find out, it's my pleasure to welcome Belinda Fawcett, Director of Property and Estates and General Counsel at Cornerstone, one of the businesses now wrestling with the challenge of rolling out the UK's communications network and simultaneously making the commercial case for investment. Belinda, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks. Pleasure to be here, Anthony. Thank you.
Great. Well, Belinda, Cornerstone is probably one of those really important companies that, to be honest, I don't know a huge amount about. What do you do, and why is the company so important to the UK's future?
So Cornerstone has been around actually for over 10 years, and we've been using sort of our experience and knowledge for that time to basically deliver solutions for the mobile industry. So we offer a full suite of services for delivering mobile infrastructure around site design, acquisition, construction and maintenance. We were originally formed as a joint venture between Vodafone and what was then O2, Telefonica, basically to consolidate their two networks. Because, and actually when I talk about consolidation, it's about both of those networks using the same infrastructure across the UK. So we spent many years working with those two customers. Now we are a independent infrastructure company. We're actually the UK's largest mobile digital infrastructure company, and we own and manage and maintain over 20,000 sites across the UK. And actually each one of those hosts one or more of the mobile MNOs, the mobile network operators. So what we do is incredibly important, but most people, as you say, don't really know who we are and why we do it. But the reality is that, everybody wants that great connectivity. Everybody wants faster speeds, more of it, reliability, resilience. But in order to do that, we have to be able to put the infrastructure up that delivers that. And that is actually what Cornerstone does.
Your company ambition, I've been ferreting around your website. It says you want to be famous for excellence in delivery, embracing transformation with our people and our customers at its heart. So who are your customers? I suppose, what do you actually build?
So what we actually build is the infrastructure. So it's in its simplicity, is the masts that everybody you can see across the UK. And they may be streetwork sites, so they look a little bit like the lampposts that we all see down the road. We build big towers or small towers, and in some cases we will put infrastructure on the roofs of buildings. Who are our customers? So our key customers at the moment are Vodafone and Telefonica, Virgin Media, O2. We also have the other MNOs, the mobile network operators across a number of our sites as well. So that's EE and 3. And we also have other sort of digital providers. We're looking at the moment at the other opportunities out there, because our infrastructure is not just used by mobile. It's there to be used by For example, we're looking at using it for environmental reasons, so looking at sort of monitoring the weather, looking at monitoring the environment, because what you've got to appreciate at each site, you're going to have your power, you're going to have your transmission, so your fibre, and so it's really helpful for a lot of the digital companies across the UK. And of course, it's such a growing sector, and all of that sector will need absolutely this critical infrastructure.
Okay. So do you actually do the fibre as well to the masts, or do you just do the mast bits of it?
We don't do the fibre to the mast. It's generally done by the fibre providers, and it's normally arranged by our key customers. That is actually complicated in itself, getting this fibre to the mast, and often there are places where you can't get the fibre to the mast, so then we have to use things like microwave. So we are mainly focused on that infrastructure.
A complicated business, and I try to summarise a complicated situation. Am I over or under optimistic about the progress being made at the moment?
No, I think what you've said was probably about right. I think we should be really optimistic about where we're going, and there is a huge amount of investment going into putting this infrastructure across the UK. So as you talked about, we've got 5G, we've got great 4G network, but there are more areas to cover. We all know, don't we? We all know, everybody drives along a road and says, oh gosh, I can't get signals, you're using Waze, and all of a sudden, it starts, the little thing goes swirling round. So there's still a lot to do, but then I think that's the dynamic nature of this industry. People talk about coverage, but we also need to talk about capacity, and that's one of the biggest things that we as an industry have to address is getting more capacity to the masts, and that was a particular issue during COVID.
And is that where 5G comes in? As you say, notwithstanding there are dark spots and everyone wanders around the corner and they lose signal, etc. in 4G, but is the challenge really now around 5G and rolling out this super fast network, which is going to not only be super fast, but super capacity? Is that what it's all about? Is 5G the big challenge now?
I think 5G is a big challenge, but I also still think, creating that ubiquitous coverage is also one of the challenges that we have. And we've got, I'm sure you've heard about the shared rural network, so that's 4G, and massive, challenges around rolling these out in sort of hard to reach areas. And often those areas are uneconomic for the mobile network operators to put their mast on or to put their equipment on because there's not enough usage from those areas. But of course, that's what we are required to do. So that's where that's where the investment is coming from, both the industry and the government, so that we can give that, give all those rural areas where currently they probably don't even have 3G. Some of them don't even have 2G. And it's about giving them those opportunities that everyone else in the country has.
Let's dig into that. The wireless infrastructure strategy, the government published that last month, and it says its target to provide and it calls it a basic 5G signal for the majority of the population by 2027 was hit. How do you describe the current challenges faced by the infrastructure provider like Cornerstone? Is it about just simply making that commercial case, or is it a technical issue that you're trying to wrestle with?
It's not so much the commercial case, I think. I think it is, one of the biggest challenges we have in rolling out and upgrading is the physical challenge of getting these sites, finding a location. And it's not like, because they're so specific in terms of the spectrum and, how it all works. All the sites have to talk to one another. So we have to be very specific about where the sites go so that the MNOs actually have the right location to provide their coverage. Planning is an issue. I can't tell you how hard it is to get, a mast up in the Lake District, for example. We appreciate, of course, these areas of outstanding national beauty, but at the same time, you can't have this connectivity without some form of infrastructure. And we have huge challenges even in the urban areas because, of course, trying to get something up on a rooftop. In London, the extent of the redevelopment that's going on, there's a lot of development, where buildings are being built upwards. So then the challenge there is that we lose the site. And so the landlord will serve what we call a notice to quit, and we then have to go and find another site. So those are, I think, the biggest challenges. And we were trying to work at pace. It's a very dynamic industry, the telecoms industry. And I think that's what, we're talking about 5G. Only 5 minutes ago, we were talking about 4G, and 5 minutes before that, it was 3G. And I have no doubt that as an industry, it will continue to evolve. And that's, I suppose, what makes it exciting. But those challenges still remain.
So why is government support so important to securing investment that you need to build up these networks?
Well, we do need government. So they have, there's recent legislation. We need their support to actually help us to roll out this infrastructure. So, for example, the influence thing, in terms of the planning regulations, they could help us there. They've recently introduced the Electronic Communications Act, which actually gives us more rights to put this infrastructure on land. And we just need their support. We need them to be very clear to the UK and that, the importance of connectivity. And we are behind, I think, in terms of sometimes the rest of the world. But there's an awful lot of industries. The health service, for example, is starting to use 5G, for life-saving issues. So, but we need the government support to do this.
Presumably, you also need to have huge amounts of involvement from the private sector, because the National Infrastructure Commission points out the long-term commercial and strategic value of 5G will be determined by whether it becomes more than just a faster version of 4G. Do you see that? Do you see that changing?
I think it is changing. I think there is there's a lot of investment from the industry in this as well. I mean, if you look at the shared rural network, it's £1 billion being invested, half from the government and half from the industry. So the industry itself is investing, and I think more and more businesses, what we're finding is that, for example, developers of big housing developments or whatever are looking, because they know that actually people buying their properties will want a great signal. They'll want great connectivity. How many times when they're buying a house, you go around the house with your mobile phone to check what the signal is like. I had one chap who was in London. He had a building and he was going to let it. It was a big building, huge value. And the CEO came along, walked around the building and basically said, I've got no mobile phone signal. I don't want it. And he came to us and said, what can you do to help? And, because there's all sorts of things we can do. It's not just about the big macro infrastructure. It's the in-building solutions. There's small cells. There's a huge amount out there where we can help. So, what we want is the private sector in other areas to be looking at connectivity and as another utility. You're not going to build a building, are you, without water and electricity, and heating or whatever it is. And so you shouldn't be building or developing anything without good connectivity, because that's what everybody requires now.
Okay. Let's talk about you, Belinda. You're a lawyer by background, but you spent the last 13 years working in mobile telecommunications in the UK. Firstly, as you said, with MBNL, and now at Cornerstone. What makes telecoms so attractive to you?
That's an interesting question, because I'm not sure I know the answer. No, look, I think it's an incredibly dynamic environment, and it's fast paced and it is exciting. And I think it is one of these areas. And I think it would be great if we could get more the young people to go into telecoms. And, in my career in telecoms, so much has changed. Even in that period of time from when I started, it is a completely different world. I mean, we're dealing with so many new technologies and new challenges, and and this is not going to change. So I think I think if you like that sort of dynamic environment, I think telecoms is a great place to be.
So you've been there for 8 years, and you acted as interim CEO recently. I mean, what's your key to success then?
Probably resilience, I think. I say that it's a dynamic and exciting environment and industry. It is challenging, and it can be, and it's also, as a woman in in a very male environment, that can have its challenges. But I think it's resilience and being professional, I think, and being respectful. And I think having people trust you, I think, is really important.
I mean, is the diversity changing in the sector? Are there more women coming into the sector?
Not enough. I think we really do need to get more women. And that, it's funny because I sort of don't understand why, people wouldn't, if you're coming out of university, why is it not a sector that you would want to go into? Because there's so much to it. And as a sector, we obviously provide the infrastructure, but there's a huge infrastructure around it in terms of, we use suppliers, contractors, you need riggers, you need, engineers, designers. There's a whole host of jobs and opportunities in the sector. It's actually huge. We're a relatively small company in terms of, what we're just around 250 people, but the wider environment around it is massive.
You can get to go up those very huge, lovely big masts, I imagine, as well. So what do you do when you're not at work? Do you actively try and avoid spending time on the phone?
No, I am constantly on my phone. And I'm constantly frustrated if I get a dropped signal. And I sort of think, I definitely need to get a mast up here. No, I mean, we all use connectivity. It's absolutely, we just, I look around everywhere you go, you see people walking around and they've got their phones, whatever, whether they're looking at film or they're trying to find their way around. That is the future. So, I'm afraid I'm slightly attached to my phone.
Well, let's talk a bit more about the delivery challenges. The Electronic Communications Code was revised in the Digital Economy Act in 2017. And that was supposed to make it easier for telecoms companies to roll out infrastructure more quickly and more cost effectively. I mean, how has that turned out in reality?
So, it was difficult at the start, I think, is probably fair to say. And because basically what the Act was doing was changing a way of working that had been in place for around 25 years, basically since mobile sort of started. And the industry was used to working in a particular way, and as were landlords. But the challenge that it had is that was often very expensive. So the amount of infrastructure that we need to give us the ubiquitous coverage is huge. And we were often being held to ransom, and which I'm sure other infrastructure companies find that that's the case. And it was really difficult to try and get sites and get terms. And this is actually not just the sites. Often we're being blocked from getting access to those sites. And so when people complain maybe of a dropped signal because there might be something wrong with that site, but actually often it's because we actually can't get access. We're being blocked for whatever reason. So the new Act was there to try and change all that, to make it sort of cheaper, quicker, easier for us to roll out that infrastructure. But as you can appreciate, there was a lot of resistance to that. And there was a lot of the agents acting on behalf of the property side, the landowner side, resisted some of the valuation principles that were set out in the Act. We understood why that was going to happen, but so we have been challenged on that, and we've had to go to the tribunal probably more than we would have wanted to. But actually what's happened over the last sort of 3-4 years is we've got a huge amount of guidance from the tribunal, and the market is now settling. And I think the realisation of what we're actually trying to do has landed. We still do get isolated cases of resistance to it. But the government, and this is where the government have been supportive, the government has been really clear, this is the way forward, this is how we are valuing land, this is the rights that this, critical infrastructure and the MNOs need in order to maintain and the good connectivity across the UK.
I mean, your bio states that your work transformed this code for the good of the industry. I mean, how did that happen? What did you do? What changed? What role did you play in changing that code?
I think we were very forward thinking on it. I mean, it was a challenge to everyone when the new piece of legislation. It's not the easiest piece of legislation, actually, and I think even the government admitted. I think they sat on the fence on some things and basically said, "Well, use it or lose it." And also, we will be expecting you to go to the tribunal and get clarity on some of these perhaps grey areas, and that's exactly what we did. You know, we didn't sort of hide in the shadows. We actually did come out there. We were brave and bold in terms of sort of, let's get the clarity, not just for us, but for everybody. You've got a piece of legislation and then it rolls over and no one really understands what it says. And sometimes we won, sometimes we didn't, but what we did always get is clarity from the tribunal. And so by getting that, we have evolved over the years, our agreements, our approach, making sure. And that's why I sort of think in the last sort of 4 years, we've got to a really good place in terms of, acceptance of what it actually says and a really good understanding. I mean, I think it's quite just quickly just to say, because the old code, because there's always been a communications code, but the old code was never challenged in court. There was never any cases because it was so badly drafted that no one ever wanted to go to court on it. So that's, that was in 84. So, we didn't want to make that same mistake again. We wanted to establish the right principles in court and have clarity for everybody, really.
So you're making progress there. I mean, are there any clear barriers that still exist to rolling out infrastructure at speed?
Well, yes. I mean, I think, the big barriers is what I've sort of talked about earlier. It is, still planning, trying to get these sites, locations, the resistance from landowners. And they're very difficult. I mean, for the shared rural network, a lot of the sites are literally in the middle of nowhere, sometimes, 20 miles maybe from the nearest road, and trying to get fibre to those sites is massive. Trying to get the equipment, we're having to use helicopters in some cases, where we're sort of putting these sites up in the highlands. You're going to have to use a helicopter to bring the equipment in. And, you get weather. So when the winter comes in, you can't often get there. And power to these sites. You got the likes of Storm Irwin. So we're reliant on that as well. So if it knocks out the electricity, to local villages or whatever, it will knock the electricity out for us. So we're also, as an industry, looking at what those solutions might be. Power resilience. How can we ensure that, because mobile connectivity, if something does happen, is absolutely critical. So we really are. That's again something that we're looking at as. Obviously, the weather is changing. We need to make sure that we have that resilience on our sites. And also looking at it from an environmental perspective. We do take, ESG, the environmental, we take that very seriously and are very keen to look at how we can make everything we do more sustainable.
Okay. Well, just to wrap up, I mean, the National Infrastructure Commission says that government must now set out a clear vision for 5G mobile networks in the upcoming wireless infrastructure strategy. That's what it said in its update recently. The strategy is out. Are you happy with what you see in that strategy?
Yeah, I think we were, actually. I think it reiterated the need to remove practical barriers to building that infrastructure. So it does accept the stuff that you and I have just been talking about. So, I think we do. I think we welcomed the strategy. We feel that it is absolutely the right thing. There were a few areas where it didn't, maybe the need to develop a more sustainable delivery ecosystem. And I think there's also something, and I'm keen to talk to the government about promoting more apprenticeships in schools, with vocational qualifications, because we need, as we say, the next generation specialists to come into the industry. It's a very people-centric business, and so I think that's maybe one area where the government didn't hit, and I think that's something that they need to look at, because we do have a skills gap in the industry.
A vast area which we haven't got quite time to get really stuck into that now, but just finish us off with, what does success look like for you in terms of the mobile networks for the UK going forward?
I think it is that ubiquitous coverage. I think that everybody has the critical connectivity that they want. The younger generation are coming up. We want that coverage, and I think, there's so many things that it can do. Everything that we are talking about, from driverless cars, that will all rely on great connectivity, and we need to be at the forefront of all this in order to be able to compete with the rest of the world. So what do I see it looking like? I'd love to think that we can, get the, all the coverage literally everywhere, and it allows people to work at home. It allows all that hybrid working that people that want and are now used to. I sort of think, you look at COVID, what would we have done if we hadn't had the connectivity that we did? We all survived. Most people survived through being able to work at home during that period. And without the connectivity that we have built over the last few years, I don't think that would have been possible. So I think I think that's what it will look like.
Well, long may that continue to improve, Belinda. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Infrastructure Podcast, and for explaining what is, as you said, it's a really important but perhaps not quite so well known part of the sector. Thanks for joining me, Belinda.
Thank you, Anthony.
Great. Well, that's all we've got time for today, but we're going to have more from the Infrastructure Podcast in the pipeline, and more guests to talk to as we continue to probe the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the new Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you will find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks again to Belinda, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.